right, thank you very much. So I had the incredible opportunity this summer to go to Guatemala as a part of our residency with the MSFL program. And so we wrote a synthesis paper connecting spirituality to social justice. And so it was suggested that I read this today. And so I am happy to present this with all of you. So I'm going to read through this. It's called Beauty in the Dust. And so it begins with an introduction. And it says this. Through the incarnation, Christ entered in and brought a vastly unexpected and deeply restorative order. God interceded, kingdom intersected. As Jesus followers, social justice is woven into the fabric of our call because it is found in the essence of God's heart. The call rubs against the scales of our natural bend. However, in doing so, it brings about the restoration of our original form. This is not an easy call, and answers appear at times elusive. We came with these helpful frames during our time in Guatemala. It's complicated, it depends, hold things loosely. They became a quick and helpful frame as we approached a deeper understanding of social justice in the context of our days there. We cannot hold all of the answers. Diverse factors encompass each particular situation, but there is hope. We know he who holds the answers. We know he who is hope. He leads us to hold him tightly as we hold this world loosely. God continues to enter into suffering. God continues to make all things new. He invites us to partner with him, and this is what social justice is. Act justly, love mercy, walk humbly. Living for the kingdom of God rather than the empires of this world invites social justice. Our choices, actions, and interactions must overflow into freedom for those around us, both our neighbors and those we have not yet interacted with. Living into a call to seek justice means living into our role as co-creators and restorers of all creation. In The God of Intimacy and Action, Tony Campolo and Mary Darling explain Door's 3 conversions. A conversion to the orientation of beliefs, which is the moral conversion, flows into interpersonal action. But to enact holistic justice, we must continue spurring change on a systematic level as well. As we drove through the lesser developed areas of Guatemala City, I loved staring out my window, trying to imagine and see into the lives who lived this reality. And then I realized the main distinction. I was driving through and they were staying. I had choices that they do not have. In the daily, we are bombarded with choices. At times, we may even make the choice not to choose, like when my friend Clint chose to buy every type of Guatemalan coffee in the small shop that we visited there. At times, our movements towards justice may seem like choices, but as Jesus followers, we do not have the choice to not choose. We must choose to orient our hearts and lives towards kingdom justice. All 3 of Door's conversions speak to calling, but sometimes we prioritize them unjustifiably. And Campolo writes here, the first, a personal connection to God, for example, we see as essential. The second, interpersonal relationships, probably is too. But the third, doing justice, is optional for far too many of us. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. This is found in Micah 6:8. God is calling his people to follow simply but boldly, with a purpose drive towards God's heart and towards justice. The walking requires humility more than it requires a classy resume. And in fact, God desires hearts far more than presentation. As outlined in Micah 6:7-8, and Isaiah 1:10-17. When the hands of God's people are covered in guilty blood, he hates their rituals. He desires clean hearts covered in his blood, so they may choose to live for kingdom and do justice. Stop doing wrong, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. That's Isaiah 1:16-17. Do justice, it is not optional, God requires it. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, Micah 6:8. This verse outlines what is good, the truly good. There are many things this world classifies as good, but it is only the truly good that will allow us to join the restorative tide. As outlined in 7-8, God invites restoration. He pursues it. He sends us out with it teeming from our pores to cover those who need it most and clothe them with his justice, hope, and peace. God desires that we walk with him. He is the true vine. as we see in John 15:1. And to say that he's the true vine is to imply that there are others. Living into the truly good means staying connected to the true vine, and this begins with dependency. My previous exposure to social injustice created me in a moral quandary more than a moral conversion. After encountering Cambodia on a cross-cultural trip in January 2009 as a part of undergrad, the call to act justly overwhelmed me. And this trip was a needed beauty for me, but I also found myself in a spiritual depression as a result. I have a new frame now. I'm reminded to be dependent and connected. Connected to the true vine, our minds are formed and reformed. This fosters our continual moral conversion. Then from this place, we can live outside of ourselves, bearing spirit-given fruit. Social justice begins with dependency on God and the God of justice, who is making all things new. Tina Vertes humbly walks with her God among the people of Limonada in Guatemala. Tita explained that we cannot simply serve out of our inertia. Our service must overflow from the time we spend with Jesus. Time with Jesus changes us. It frees us to free others. Tita maintains her hopeful, joy-filled presence because she is, and I quote her here, addicted to his presence. True freedom begins in he in whom we are free. Shorty works in the same community, and as he articulated his own story, Shorty proved unwilling to outline a ministry structure, and instead pointed us back to dependency. He makes the choices he does, impacting the lives the Lord intersects with his, because he is listening for his guiding voice and staying out of his own finite understanding. Dependency comes first. The first step in the disciples' new Jesus-given action plan, for example, was to wait. I am going to send you what my Father has promised, but stay in the city until you have been clothed from power on high, Jesus told them in Luke 24:49. Before they lived out their commission, they waited for the Holy Spirit. They had been called to share the gospel with a broken world and to join in God's restoration creativity. But first, they waited. Love is patient, as we see in 1 Corinthians 13:4. Maybe this helped them to know the difference between living out kingdom according to their own efforts or according to God's agenda, discerning between their own strength and this power on high that he spoke of. True social justice needs to be rooted in freedom and headed towards the same. It cannot begin well if it begins in guilt. If our actions flow from a place of guilt, they will likely be driven towards satisfying our own precedents and our own affections. And this is not social justice, but social judgment. Social judgment leads us to our own agenda. Social justice must be rooted in God's love and purpose towards an expression of that love. Without Christ-like love, our actions become hogwash at best, to paraphrase 1 Corinthians 13. Social justice keeps us in step with God's agenda. In dependency, we must step forward boldly toward calling, empowered by God's restoring power and guided by the Spirit. Stanley Rother knew he was called to the people in the parish of Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. He did beautiful things among the people. And when spiritual unrest emerged and his life was under threat, he returned to the U.S., but his call to his people was too strong, and he returned back to his parish. He was killed there, and as we prayed in the room where Rother died, I was poignantly aware of the fact that Rother did not have another agenda other than his Lord's. He was not concerned about his own safety more than his call. As we see in 1 Corinthians 13:5, love is not self-seeking. According to Henry Nouwen, who writes about Rother's life, more and more priests had to leave the country to avoid certain death, and Stan did not have any illusion about his own safety. What sustained him were the concrete needs of his people. He thought more about them than about himself. End of that quote. He was faithful until his life was taken from him. Love never fails. 1 Corinthians 13:8. He had no second agenda. To take on God's agenda in light of social justice, we must live into the things God is about. We must love mercy. Micah 6:8. We become people who welcome others regardless of and in the midst of their circumstances into the presence of God. Our role in social justice begins by pointing people to the already present Christ and then acting in justice to show them his heart. Rock and Van Dyke write in Geography of Grace, Doing Theology from Below, Whatever else the gospel means, it means that we stand with and for those who find themselves on the outside looking in. And our call is to remind people that there is always a seat at the table. We take on the task of restoration. God's agenda becomes our own. All of the suffering in the world, the social injustice, leads many to ask where God can be found. Liz, a woman native to Guatemala, as she read the scriptures to us on the overlook of the Guatemala City dump, as you can see here, and it's a place where thousands of people, largely women, sort through the garbage to try to make an honest living for their family. And she stood there reading the scriptures to us on the overlook, and she asked how Guatemala City could understand the hope found in God when the dump was in her center. However, perhaps this is where God's presence is even thicker. Rock and Van Dyke assert, where is God? God is with us, particularly among the least, Emmanuel, end quote. Through the theology of the cross, through the incarnation, Christ entered into our suffering and met us there. We take the presence of Christ into the current places of suffering, but we must believe too that he is already there. I prayed on the overlook that Jesus would help me to see him in the low places. This is the reality Rother lived by standing in solidarity with the people in Lake Atitlan. Gunger scripted wonderful truth in his song, Beautiful Things. The night before our team visited the parish at Lake Atitlan, we sang a piece of this song. For me, this song pointed to the theology of the glory, and the lyric, you make beautiful things out of the dust, stirs in me. It stirs me towards the beauty God has set in motion through his heart for restoration of souls and earth and lives. Rother didn't get to see the future forward picture of his community after the persecution subsided and the peace was restored. He did not see the picture of the beauty from the dust. Rother instead saw beauty in the dust, and for him, that was enough. We need to realize where God is and partner with him, bringing presence and hope. Love always perseveres. 2 Corinthians 13:4. We must follow him into the low places. We can enter into the theology of the cross, always hoping in the theology of glory. And in doing so, in orienting our hearts and lives towards the kingdom, God will show us what acting justly looks like in our own context. So in conclusion, our conversations and the frames that were provided during this residency in Guatemala helped me to shed guilt and take on fresh freedom. I have a passion for restoration, witnessing it, experiencing it, and enacting it. I love listening to the hearts of students and speaking truth over their lives. I love seeing them set free in small and big ways because they understand more of who Jesus is and more of who they are in him. And it was revolutionary for me to understand that this is social justice too. And it restores my perspective on how I can continue to live into my calling. So where might God be leading you? And as you, no matter where he leads you, be dependent in the present before you take your next step. Campolo and Darling write, God commands we work for justice, and it is our intimacy with Christ that ignites us to do what God commands, end quote. As exemplified through Tita and Shorty, reveling in the presence of God and seeking the voice of the Lord are key action points. We must seek God's heart and find our own definition there if we are going to live into our calling in a life-giving and sustainable way. I know what it is to neglect his invitation to dwell with him and find rest there. Sometimes it takes a point of emotional or spiritual exhaustion to lead me back to dependency, and other times the reminder is more subtle. But at all times, to receive the freedom we have been given and to help others live into this place, we must hold on to our webbing. I spent the morning of my final day in Antigua ziplining, and it was beauty, and my friend Joel and I formed several metaphors on which to stake claim. While ziplining, I had two jobs to ensure that I would stay facing forward. Make a ring with my gloved index finger and thumb to place behind me on the cable and to hold on to my webbing, attaching my harness to the cable. Several zips in, our instructions shifted slightly. I got out of my normal rhythm. On the next zip, I forgot to hold my webbing. I did not realize what I had done differently. I just knew the effects of it. It felt like I had to hold up my body. It felt uncomfortable and straining, and I wondered if my harness had begun to loosen. And when I spoke with Joel about my experience, he pointed out that I had forgotten to hold my webbing. It made all the difference. I was not unsafe, but I had lost my point of stability. How telling this is of my relationship with spiritual disciplines and their role in my relationship with Jesus and his calling on my life. Often I get hasty, I neglect my webbing, but in the small things I must be faithful, I must stay connected to the vine and hold fast to my webbing. Follow him into the low places. I prayed that God would help me to see him in the low places. Days later, we toured the ruins of a convent in Antigua, and late in our tour, we descended a staircase into a dark hole, as you can see there. You can see the light actually from that hole, but we were going down into the darkness. Before descending, the hole seemed unknown and foreboding. Once standing on the ground level of the donut-shaped concrete room, I still questioned its purpose and our placement within it. Then, as we all sang a song together, we resonated and discovered profound beauty, and it was one of the most beautiful songs I have ever heard because of the way it resonated through this unknown space. But we can, and so what I learned from this is that a calling to social justice may at times seem to hold the same disconcerting quandary as a dark hole, but we can follow he who is a worthy guide into the low places, find beauty there, and point to his presence. Jim Martin states in his book, The Just Church, the call to the work of justice is therefore not God sending his church out into a place where God cannot be found. Rather, God is inviting us into the place where he is already at work. It is here, among the world's most vulnerable, that the good news of God turns out to be very good indeed, end quote. May we live freely into the good news. May we follow him into the low places and find him there. May we seek his presence in both the valleys and the mountaintops. May we walk humbly with him. May we learn his love for mercy. May we act justly, for he has shown us what is good. Thank you very much.
Questions for Anna? I don't have a question, I just have a statement. The one picture there where the beauty and the dust words are, just really speaks of resurrection. And that's when I first saw it, and that just speaks of hope and life. And so.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right.
Very good. Thank you very much.